Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. We are your hosts, Vonnie Herrera and Tammy and Dice Howard, the co-founders of Think 3D, and we're back for another episode to talk about something that is very relevant right now, given where we are at in the world. Tammy, what is that?
Disagree to a degree.
That's right. Disagree to a degree. That phrase, which is also a show that's going to be coming out on Thinker Networks. Make sure you check for that. But disagree to a degree is a phrase we coined just because a lot of times what happens is people use the phrase, let's agree to disagree. And I hate that phrase. And I hate that phrase because what it basically means is I'm not going to change my mind. You're not going to change your mind. I'm not going to try to change my mind. You're not going to try to change your mind. Let's just go away and ensure that nothing happens. And obviously that is good for no one, especially when you're not satisfied with the results of the current situation. So the idea of disagreeing to a degree means that in many, many, many cases, we don't disagree 100% with someone.
Yeah.
Usually there's something that they are saying that is valid. There's something that they're saying that is true. There's something that they are saying that is makes sense. It's logical, right? And we agree with that part. But then they go and say something else that makes us disagree. And what happens is we tend to disagree with the entire thing when we could say, I disagree with you to a degree. So on this part, I can't get with you. But on this part, I can. And it's about focusing on the part where you do agree so that you always at least get that. So there is at least that amount of growth. There's at least that amount of consensus for you to be able to go forward and actually do something.
Yeah, what's important for me on this topic is obviously we know that we're in a very divisive climate. Folks seem to be, clearly majority of people, it appears to be on one side to the extreme or the other side. And in my opinion, we're talking about the 10% outliers. And when the reality for me is we have probably 80% more in common with each other than the differences. But when we allow the loudness, the frequency of the folks that just seem to be so polarizing on both sides, we leave very little room for people to, again, find that commonality. Right. When we have way more in common with each other than not. So in your mind, and I know this is one of the things that you're working on this show, which I'm excited to watch, because again, I think what that will do is to show people how to go about doing that. How would you say, what is the kind of mentality that you would say a person should enter into any discussion? What are some of those key things that has folks entering in with a level of curiosity to make sure that they can find those nuances, disagree appropriately, and at the same token, still leave without being completely divisive with each other?
Yeah. Well, I think step number one is you have to evaluate your results currently. Step number one, you have to be able to say, am I getting the type of response out of the conversation that I want? Am I getting the results out of the conversation that I want? Right? Is a person engaging with what it is that I'm saying? Am I inspiring, motivating, or challenging that person to do something that brings us closer to what is actually affecting me? So that's number one. So once we establish that we're not satisfied with the results, and whether you're a soccer mom, whether you're a protester, whether you're a police officer, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, whatever, people can look outside and say, I'm not satisfied with these results. They can go onto social media and say, I'm not satisfied with these results. And so there's something that needs to change and something to be different. That's number one.
Just that. That should be universal. Nobody can say, this is the way forward.
Right. No one's satisfied with it.
Nobody.
And so at that point, that means the shop should be open for a conversation and dialogue, trying to find the right way to move forward. Then the next thing that you have to do is you have to decide how you want to come out of these conversations. And you should always go into conversations in the manner in which you want to come out of those conversations. And so if you want to come out with understanding, you have to go in with the idea of being considerate of how to get that person to understand. If you want to come out of it positive, you need to go into it positive. Energy in, energy out. And so we have to decide how we want to come out of those conversations. So even right now, as we dialogue about things that are happening in the world, what happens after? Mm-hmm. Are we going to live together after? Are we going to have to figure out things after? Are we going to have to collaborate, work together, challenge each other after? Then if that's the case, then we want to make sure that there's a relationship after.
I mean, there's no laughing matter, but it feels very like Civil War-ish, right? In terms of like so polarizing. When, in my viewpoint, take social media, for instance. I think we all can agree, go throughout the feed, just scroll through Facebook and ask yourself when someone made a very, a statement that was out there on one side or the other, and then just look at the dialogue. When's the last time you ever saw somebody in that stream stop that says, you know what, you changed my mind?
Right.
I would gauge it to say never, next to never.
Very few times, if any. And
so what's the point? The person posting it, right? I mean, you can't control those things, but we can choose how to engage. And so in your mind, and this is one of the things, when is it not worth it, right? Because it's absolutely needed. We know we get to these places because you need healthy dialogue. You need healthy disagreement. You need challenge. But before we get into that, because I want to put a pin in that topic, but when is it not worth it? Like when do you say, no, I'm just not going to engage in this because of X, Y, Z?
Like we tell our clients, they say, what's your ideal client? And we always say the willing. You just got to be willing. If you're willing, then we can have a conversation. If you're not willing, then we're done. And as we say with relationships in general, if you're done trying, you're done. And so when a person says, I'm not trying to fix it, then that means they're trying to keep it the same. And I have an issue with anyone that's trying to keep it the same if it's not working for everyone, but specifically if it's not working for me.
Yeah, I think one thing we talk about, leading with positive intent. I mean, that's what we can control. We can choose to say, I know this is probably a decent human being. I know they probably mean well. And I would gauge to say 90 to 95% of our society are genuinely good people.
Right.
But what's got lost in this, right, is us leading with these divisive points. So in that space of allowing grace and allowing understanding, again, it's one of those genuine curiosity things for me, based off that person's upbringing and what they were exposed to and the things that, take racism, right? Again, most people say, like, how could someone be racist? Like, I'm genuinely curious to say, if you go back and you ask yourself what they were exposed to from their parents to their environments. My father, he's writing a book right now on his life. And there was a moment where when he was, I think probably early 30s, late 20s, he was working as a bartender. And there was a traveling salesman that was coming through town and had gotten to know him, would sit down and find out the guy liked whiskey. And my grandmother would come in. She loved whiskey. They both loved jazz, and they got to know each other. And then when the guy was about to leave town after about a month and a half here, he gave my dad this brown paper bag. And he said, I want to leave this here so I can genuinely leave this part of me here. Inside of it was a KKK robe. Right? This man changed and because of his exposure. So in that, right, if you would have just caught him on day one and said he's in the KKK, you would have said this is a disgusting human being, et cetera. And again, he had said, I know I've done some things in my life. But being curious, wherever he grew up, that was a part of the norm, et cetera. But how do we get to that place, right, of entering in ourselves, of curious to the background? How is it that person arrived here and thinks this way? And then we always say leaders go first.
Yeah.
How can you go first to really say, I want to be curious? Because if you feel heard and you feel valued, what's the odds I might reciprocate that?
Well, and that's the thing. It allows us to focus on what has to be done to change the circumstances. Changing people is ideal, but it's not necessary for changing circumstances. And it's not necessary for your happiness. And it's not necessary for your success. Like, people don't have to feel good about me. What I'm concerned with is their ability to negatively impact my life, their ability to become an obstacle to what it is that I'm trying to achieve. That's my piece of it. And so when we talk about agreeing to disagree, or disagreeing to a degree, it's how we get to a place that we can move the change forward. And then generally the people will follow. And so for me, again, how you go into it is how you want to come out of it. So I try to get to a place where there are no villains, there are no victims, there are results. This is a result of behaviors. How do I affect those behaviors, or how do I affect those circumstances that affect those behaviors? I mean, let's be honest. People understand this concept. You use race, and let's just use that for an example, because that one is difficult to talk about, and we like doing the heavy lift. But people understand this concept in every other way, right? Especially in the Midwest, especially, well, anywhere. They say, I'm a Mason. Why are you Mason? I'm a Mason because my daddy was a Mason, because his daddy was a Mason, and his daddy was a Mason. Said, okay, well, you in the military. Why are you in the military? Because my daddy was a military man. His daddy was a military man. His dad. Why are you a farmer? Well, because my daddy was a farmer. His daddy was a farmer. His daddy was a farmer. Well, if your daddy's daddy was a racist and your daddy was a racist, the chances of you not being racist are slim. Mm-hmm. Because that's how it works. That's who teaches you. That's who trains you. Now, at that point, why it happened is only important in terms of the context it provides us to change that circumstance. But the fact that it happened is inconsequential, in the sense that I'm not going to be focused on the cars that I pass more than I'm going to be in front of the cars that are in front of me when I'm in traffic. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. And so for me, in any situation, in any conversation you have, no matter how difficult, is how do we move the conversation forward? How do we move it into action? How do we move it into something that can be done? Because the virtue of what you do is what it does. Yeah. And if what you're doing is not producing the results that you want, you can't be beholden to that idea. The best idea wins.
Yes, let's talk about the value of this, right? Because again, I think a lot of people going with the expectation, like if no one would say like you want everyone just to agree, because that's never going to happen. Challenge is necessary. Challenge makes business better. It makes the product better. It makes everything we do in life, for the most part, better. And so oftentimes people have this apprehension towards challenge. As soon as I challenge you, you feel like I'm attacking you. And again, where do you learn how to have healthy dialogue without feeling attacked? And I love the phrase, there's no victims in this space.
No villains.
No villains. It's saying challenge is necessary, right? So what we're searching for is a fine line. Mm-hmm. But because again, people, the easy way out is to go feel offended or jump on one side or the other. But we know that challenge is necessary. That's how society gets better. That's how everything gets better. So what are your thoughts about how to frame that up? How do we see that and put that into context to say this is absolutely necessary, given the context of, yes, there's a very tactful way of going about it, but why is challenge so necessary?
Well, that's how we shape ourselves, right? Because obviously the natural state for anyone or anything is at rest. It is in its place, mm-hmm. with no friction on it, with no weight on it, with no pressure on it. That is the natural state. Your natural state is to take the path of least resistance and have the least amount of whatever.
Yes.
And so it takes challenge to cultivate that thing, to mold that clay, right? Like the amount of challenge and the amount of pressure can be different depending on the shape that you are making that thing. So like a potter molds clay, you put a little bit more pressure here to thin it out. You put a little less pressure here to be able to allow it to expand. And you have to contort these things in order to shape it. Now, where it becomes difficult is that, as it relates to people, we don't always have the ability to advocate for ourselves to determine what we're being molded into and the circumstances that are molding us into whatever that thing is. And so we have been challenged in a lot of negative ways, mm-hmm. but the same thing has to happen on the positive side. We have to challenge people through a positive way, through grace and understanding and respect and a desire to get the intended outcome. And so we have to be able to receive that challenge. But the key to that, as we talk about a lot, is the ability to make it about the behavior, the action, the result versus the person.
Yes.
Even though it feels good, even though it seems appropriate because there's an autonomous being that you feel like is conflicting with you in some way. But whenever you make it about the person, that person is going to tend to feel attacked. And when people feel attacked, for no matter the reason, they're biologically coded to fight or flight. They're going to draw in or they're going to lash out. It doesn't matter why you're attacking them. As soon as they perceive they're being attacked, they're going to respond in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And so for us is to be able to say, we want to focus on the behavior. We want to focus on a result. We want to challenge that, not necessarily the person.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to kind of, when you draw this up is to say that's the degree. Right. What degree, what piece of that pie are we slicing out? What behavior? This is the thing specifically that we're talking about, because it's easy to wrap it all up together. Again, I was having a lunch with a friend of mine just recently, and I call myself a conservative Democrat, again, more in the middle. And he was probably saying I'm more of a liberal Republican. And we had, really great dialogue. And there's some things we disagree on, but we can have some conversation about that. And when it's done in a respectful manner, again, I value his opinion because it's not done the wrong way. We can say, here's the degrees difference. We started with, again, where's the commonality? In our community, in our society, we want safe places to live. We want thriving businesses. We want all these things that are so much alike. We have to be able to parse out what is that degree and then engage in conversations with openness, with curiosity, with a duality of both of us have a respectful opinion and find out how do we get to that space.
For sure. Principles don't have a party. They're your principles.
Yep.
No matter what the thing is, they're your principles, and either I can align with them or I can't, and that's where the conversation has to start. And so, to land this plane, what we would say is when we talk about the idea of disagreeing to a degree, it just means that you don't always have to lock in with what someone says, but you need to be able to acknowledge the places where you do align, and you need to make the agreement that you're going to move forward in those ways, those things that you can do. We can argue about whether or not we, if you mow in the front yard or the backyard, but we agree that the lawn needs to be mowed. We agree that this needs to be done. Now we could talk about which part of it, but we agree that it needs to be done, and so let's do it. And so that's one of the things that we need to be thoughtful about is how can we move the conversation forward. So we challenge you to have those conversations, but to be able to acknowledge where it is that you agree, what you align with, and at least take those steps to move forward. And this applies to any type of conflict that you may have with any of them. And obviously you have to be willing. It doesn't account for unwillingness. But if a person is willing to have a conversation with you, there's a better way to have that conversation.
Absolutely.
So with that, you can keep up with us always at letsthinkthree.com or on our socials at Think3D Solutions. It is our pleasure to always come to you. And until next time.